when you said yes to speak on Retreat Builder, I was diving deeper into the Instagram page and I saw this quote that just hit me from T.S. Eliot. That's most of the trouble in the world is caused by people wanting to be important. And that hit me in a very good way. Not like a ton of bricks, but just like an aha. Like, wow, it's so true. And one of the things I really loved about what you're doing with Sky Cave, marketing wise, is that you never see you or your wife. I went to the website and there I learned more about you, but I don't even think your names are on the website. It's very like, focus on what we're doing. It's not about us, and I really love that. And as I meet with other people who are doing really big things, I find that they are aligned with that same idea or way of doing things. And I thank you for that reminder.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, that's something that we've really tried to do from the beginning, that I really felt like made this unique in the space, where that it's not someone, it's not a teacher. There's not like someone that someone's looking to as a sense of gauge of worth. There's not another human that someone's mirroring off of how they're supposed to be, or gauging their worth, or gauging their level of achievement that the darkness really brings. And, something recently that we've come up against within that is that we've realized how important we are, though, to the experience of being in the dark. And as this starts to get bigger, it kind of became clear that we needed to bring ourselves in some way, it's still exploring the best way, into the picture a bit more, because it's so much more than just going into the dark. And that from how we present it, where it's really the darkness is the whole thing, the level and the quality of the support is like the other kind of half of it. Whereas, like now, when we really step back, the experience, even in the darkness, is one part exposure of like what's revealed and exposed while someone's in the dark. The other part is nurture and support. And like both are needed. Otherwise, the level of exposure that happens in there is so overwhelming, surprisingly so. Just about everyone who comes through is like, that's way more challenging than I imagined. And especially for the people who feel like they're very well prepared. And more especially for the people who don't feel like they need any kind of support. They just got that. They have it handled, which was me when I first went in. And so, yeah, that element of how important the experience, the level of experience and quality of the support that really creates what's happening here. And yeah, not having a face that's really like, it's the darkness. And to me, what's been so unique and that I've really sat with is that what the darkness brings up in people is the feminine qualities. Like that's where somebody really lands when they settle in the dark, when they come into newness, when they really have these new discoveries and insights. It comes through a sense of nurture, a sense of tenderness, a sense of vulnerability and exposure. It doesn't come through. There's no sense of strength that gets someone through the dark and really dropping into newness, because typically that sense of strength is like a masculine holding that can endure anything, which is great when you need to survive in the world and achieve and accomplish. But it doesn't really bring us into greater depths within. And to have that thing, that medium, that force that's bringing it forward as the darkness, as something that doesn't even have, a face. And to me, what an appropriate way for the feminine to really deliver these really deep qualities, um, through something that doesn't have that propulsion to be important in the world, which is definitely deep in our enculturated conditioning. Even as a little kid, I watch my little kids, all they want me to do is watch them do whatever they're doing, so that there is, is it a sense of self-important, or is this just a sense of like feeling seen, because connection is so important to feel connected. But then when we really lack that ability to connect with ourselves, and then we need it from others because we don't really know how, or it doesn't feel safe to genuinely settle in our body, then all the funny things that we do in our culture that aren't then looked at as funny to get connection from others. And so feeling important is the thing that makes us then feel the most safe, because we actually don't feel safe. And the darkness really reveals that, how disembodied we are, how unsafe we feel, which is totally fine. Not that there's anything wrong with that, it's just how we're wired. But then what happens when we come to see how unsettled and unsafe we feel? What do we do from there? Do we endure, or do we embrace and nurture?
Wow, that is so profound and beautiful. It's making me think of, or I mean, just such a perfect time to have this conversation as we're in Scorpio season and like moving into the darkness seasonally, at least here in the northern hemisphere. And like you said, the yin and the yang. Well, you didn't say those words, but that's what I pictured in my mind. You know, the yin is the night, is the darkness, and I love how you mentioned that, you didn't want to put a face, something for people to look at, or the way I interpret it is hold on to, because we're constantly looking for something to hold on to. And in the darkness, there is nothing to hold on to but yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just thinking about all those things and how they relate. It's
Mm-hmm.
great what
And
you're doing.
I think it's a slippery slope, because there are things that people have to teach and to bring forward. And yet, how we unconsciously, perhaps just as human animals, it's how we learn as kids, we mirror and mimic what we see, right? How kids learn, they're just mirroring and mimicking, but we're doing the same thing unconsciously, even as adults, when we see somebody who's teaching something, whatever it may be, we're then kind of unconsciously mirroring and mimicking their patterns. And so somebody may have some really deep truths to bring, but they also have all of their baggage and conditioning that they don't even know that they also bring. And then so somebody's then mirroring this sense of like, I feel something in this person, and so spirituality looks like this, and it feels like this, and I'm big and I'm strong. And if you're spiritual, you're able to manifest wealth. Like, how did that notion ever come into spirituality? Like the sense that that has somehow got entwined, where there's like manifest, like if you're spiritually awake, you should be able to manifest abundance. Like somehow consumerism has been wed with spirituality. It's really taken on another kind of camouflage of self-importance, of power, right? So people have left the world behind, but spiritual power looks like this, but it kind of lacks that level of vulnerability, of tenderness, which I think which I see that the darkness brings. Like there is no grand experience in the dark in the way that people maybe expect it to be. People who are oriented in that way, who are in in a plant medicine kind of vein, and in spirituality and the breath work, and not that there's anything wrong with that. They obviously all have their beauty and their awakening and transformational power. And if it has somebody, though, orienting towards big, grand experiences, is that another form of consuming? Because there's a felt sense of lack and unworthiness. And if we don't have this big thing, then we're feeling the lack and the unworthiness. And so the darkness does not deliver any grand experience. You don't get big, beautiful lights that like transport you to another dimension and you're feeling really important about yourself because you're doing the work and all these things, and not writing that off. It just doesn't happen in the darkness. And those things are important. There is a sincerity that carries someone into that in doing the work. And this invitation to explore, like, how we insulate in a sense of power and purpose. When we have a sense of purpose, we feel important and on point. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but there's a real curious exploration which happens in the dark when you have no purpose. You're left with your humanness.
Hmm.
And for 95% of people who go into the dark, that is very unsettling.
Yeah.
And so it's really curious to point towards most of the things we do. Are we moved to do them because we feel lack? Or are we genuinely moved to do them because we're just clear, and it's not like we need anything from them, not because it's going to give us anything. It's just a true movement. But then, we get into the funny weeds of us being like, well, then I'm not going to do that because it has to be a true movement. And then now we're back to like mirroring and mimicking how somebody said we're supposed to be. So not even to have that, it's just to begin to notice what's moving us and why.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I was having a chat with Alexander Pohl, who facilitates ice baths in a lake in Sweden, in a frozen lake. Like he literally cuts out a piece of ice from the lake and you go inside. And we were talking about respecting nature and how it shows you this very thing. You do it with darkness, and he does it with the cold, and it brings you to a place where you realize that you are nothing. You are nothing, and not in a putting you down way. It's just like remove the idea that you are anything other than everything and all of it and nothing. And that is very unsettling. Even for me, like I say it, I know what it means, but when I feel it in my body, it's different
Mhm.
to experience it.
Totally. Yeah, and I think that's a thing. A lot of people come here and they're like, conceptually they get it. Conceptually they may even teach it. They may be people who teach these things. And then to actually feel it is threatening. Like
Yeah.
simplicity feels threatening. Probably not innately, certainly not to a kid, but like through our cultural indoctrination and assimilation, if it's just simple, self-importance is gone. If we're simple the way we are in the world, and then we're simple in not having a grand spiritual experience, and it's just simple, it exposes a lot in us. And so the invitation then in the dark, the doorway, so to speak, into the dark, in the dark, is really like not shielding oneself from lack, not doing something, like really just being tenderly in a sense of lack. And what we find here is that the door in the dark for most people doesn't really open until they can genuinely admit kind of a sense of helplessness and that's probably why overall we tend to see that people who are more oriented in the yin, who then tend to be more women, have an easier time dropping in the dark, because a man has a lot harder time admitting that he's scared, sad, and kind of like lost or helpless. That would like strip a lot of what how we're supposed to be culturally. And so, but that is the door in the dark, when one is just genuine in their conditioning and they're not kind of puffing up to be strong or use tools and techniques to kind of move through it and get over it and get through it and resolve it, like to actually settle and soften in a felt sense of being unresolved. And so we use a lot of somatic orientation, like we have a real somatic approach in how we support people before and after they go in the dark, and then while they're in there. Like there's check-ins twice a day, morning and evening, with myself, and then with Adrienne, my other teammate here. She does 2-hour somatic sessions before and after people go into the dark. And so there's a real settling in the body, a real getting honest with what's happening in the body. And something that happens for everyone in the dark. If you asked me a year ago, are people scared when they go in there, I probably would have said 10 to 20%.
Me, I would be scared.
Well, but now that I see it more clearly, and what I didn't see a year ago was how much I cover unconsciously my sense of not feeling safe. Like I was having a session with Adrienne a couple months ago, and something was coming up, and she's like, "What are you feeling?" And I was like, "I feel like sad and unsafe," and it kind of, and as silly as it sounds, I was like, "It feels weak." And if I turn just a slight turn this way, I could feel strong again. But it would be me doing something to kind of feel strong, as opposed to just not doing anything and then all of a sudden it feels weak. And but that's what would authentically moving in me, and I would be masking it. If I were to slightly turn and beginning to see that in myself, I was then able to begin to see more clearly how that was happening for lots of people in there, and then asking the right questions while someone's in there, and invitations to feel what's happening in the body. Others who couldn't see that were then able to see more clearly what was happening in them. So I'd say 100% of people experience some level of fear when they go into the dark. And that's a spectrum, the highest end of the spectrum being a sense of panic, like full-blown panic attack, to just unsettled, maybe even just bored. But the boredom tends to be a defense, like someone's gone totally numb unconsciously as a protective safety mechanism, because what they're feeling is so overwhelming. And so they've gone numb, they don't know that, and then it's just kind of bored. I had a friend go in 4 or 5 months ago. She was just going to go in for 24 hours. And I went up to check in on her after just 10 hours, and I said, "How's it going?" And we're talking through the door, and she said, "Yeah, I think I'm done. Nothing's happening. It's just kind of boring." And I was like, "Okay, well," and this is a common thing for some people. And it's like, well, how do you know you're bored? Like, what is bored? Like, what is telling you in your experience that you're bored? What does boredom feel like in your body? And as she began to attune to her body and had the safety and connection with another to really help her co-regulate and really attune to what was happening, within 30 seconds she was like, "Whoa, I'm actually really scared." And like my stomach's clenched and I'm shaking, and then a whole cascade of emotions and sensations moved through. But a few minutes before, she was just bored and had no connection to what was going on. And not like she was doing that intentionally. And, so that's happening all the time. Well, for people, but more on this end of seeing it, it's happening all the time in the dark, where people are insulating in a sense of safety, but they don't know that because it is, right, a safety mechanism. And so that support of where, like, there was somebody a couple months ago and I went up and I was like, how are you feeling? He's like, I'm very peaceful, I'm very calm, I'm very happy. But from the other end, and having known him before he went in, and kind of some of the ways in which he copes or moves as different mechanisms, it didn't feel totally real. And so then asking a bit more questions of what's that like in your body, within a couple minutes, he was like, I'm actually, like, my stomach's locked up. I actually feel anxious. There was all these things that there wasn't access to before. And
Wow.
so it's amazing how, yeah, just the layers of resistance that we get insulated in a sense of safety and don't really see clearly what's happening. And then that's, happening for myself all the time too. It's like just my current level of misunderstanding. And then there's another of like, whoa, I was doing that because I was feeling this and I had no idea, but it was really a movement of resistance or covering this. Because if I wasn't doing that, I would feel overwhelmed and unsafe. And so there's, right, a time and a place for that exposure to come up. And that's why the darkness being two parts, exposure and nurture, so that they can really get digested and assimilated when they come up and we see them.
And how did you get started in this darkness work?
Yeah, I started spending a lot of time alone when I was maybe 19, 20. There was a breakup with a partner and there was a lot of despair. I got turned on to spirituality. Now looking back at it, um, my movement to spirituality was probably more of a cover than an actually digesting and assimilating the pain and sadness, which now I get to come back into, which has been more of an unpleasant journey. Now that I shed that layer of how I maybe performed spirituality in some way. And so, but then from there, there was the next 18, 19 years was lots of meditation, lots of time alone for about 7 years. I'd spend 2 to 6 months alone out in the wilderness, mostly in southern Baja, north of Cabo. There's a little mountain oasis, desert oasis, where I would spend 4 to 6 months alone, a lot of years. And then a lot of times in Northern California in Mount Shasta. And so I spent a lot of time alone. I loved that exploration and solitude. And then in 2011, somebody mentioned a darkness retreat to me. And I was like, whoa, that's right up my alley. I love that exploration. And so my wife and I, we blacked out our house together in 2012 and did our first dark retreat together for 5 days. And I
Wow.
was like, wow, now I want to go do it alone. And so I went back down to Baja. I built this little earth bag dome. It was like an 8 foot diameter dome in the earth. I was a bit more extreme in those years. And so I went in for 10 days in this 8 foot diameter dome. Um, I did earth bag dome. I didn't have anyone to really support me at the time. So I just went in, I was alone. I could kind of gauge time. I could hear the crickets and the birds, so I could count the days. I brought in enough food to eat for 5 days. I fasted for the last 5 days, um, of which we highly discourage fasting here. But I was very much in my yang kind of, I could endure, and I didn't see it that way then. And so that first solo time in the dark, I was floored by how hard it was, because I could sit on the same rock and meditate for 10, 12, 14 hours a day and be totally happy. The winter before that, I had spent 40 days up in the mountains alone, didn't see anyone, and was really happy. But the dark was an entirely different thing. I was floored by how challenging it was, and how all my time in solitude and all my meditation experience didn't have me really dropping and genuinely feeling settled. Um, I later, fast forward to now, we see that all the time. That people who come who are very spiritually oriented have a spiritual persona and sense of self, not all the time, but a lot of times have a more difficult time settling in. It's like another level of camouflage. It's another persona, another performance. It's not totally settled from the inside out. It's not like a deeper level of intimacy in someone's body. It's a persona, which is totally fine. The camouflage and the difficulty of that gets exposed in the dark, where we've had people come who have no spiritual practice, no spiritual background, don't have much spiritual aspiration. They're just genuinely curious. I mean, there was one guy who came and he's like, I don't even like meditating. In the early days, I was like, oh, I don't think this is for you. But now it's like, oh, this is perfect. This is for the Zen mind, beginner's mind. And he went in and he went through the gauntlet of the first day of like, oh, all the full range of emotions, didn't have the spiritual tools to kind of manage it. So it just really had to be with it. And he was willing and sincere and open and curious. And by the second day, as he passed through that membrane of, holy shit, I'm crazy, all the things. And then by the second day, he was just so delighted, hours and hours in stillness, in like a rich, tender, intimate stillness. An older man, 60 years old, off the New York Stock Exchange for 30, 40 years, just crying from how beautiful the stillness and the tenderness and the intimacy was in his body. Hours of stillness. And I'm like, you realize people meditate their entire lives and never touch that level of depth of stillness. And he's just like, I wasn't doing anything. Like there wasn't even like I'm a great meditator or look at I did. It was more like look what's here. Look what I discovered, not through doing, just through attuning and relaxing and connecting. And so I emerged out of that 10 day and I was like, well, I'd love to build a dark retreat for myself. And I thought maybe a couple friends would be interested. And so at that time, I tried to get the money together to build one. It just didn't happen. I kind of let it go. 5 years passed, and we landed on this land in Southern Oregon. And within the first year, we built the first dark retreat in 2018. And we started using it in 2020. And in the early days, the it's really it's really evolved here how we are with people while they're in the dark, and it's constantly evolving. Like I learn so much from each person that comes here. Like even just the last couple days, the last couple people who came through, each person like teaches us something because everyone's conditioned differently. Everyone has different ways of managing and fixing and trying to and cope. And so everyone brings something where I'm like, whoa, that was totally new and a new way of connecting. And since there's not a playbook of like day one, we're going to go over this, it's really like meeting people where they're at and we settle. And so in the early days, it was really all I knew in the dark was my own experience. So people would come and it was very like, my very cold, masculine, spiritual warrior, hero's journey approach, where it's like, here's your dark retreat. I'm going to bring your food. We're not going to talk. The more silence and lost you are in time, the better it is, right? The colder and harder it is, the stronger you're going to be. That was part of my orientation back then. And so people had their own journey. And that was probably for a year or two. And then Adrienne came on board, who is a friend who I've known for 18 years. She's rooted in somatic therapy and her own real depth and awakening, which she keeps really close to her and very humble. She's not even on social media. She doesn't even want to. Yeah. the lack of wanting to be self-important. She really is, yeah, rooted in that. And so things really changed as she got involved. There was more of a sense of the feminine, and the nurture started to come in. And what I started to see too was how much I was missing. Like in the beginning, somebody would come out of the dark. In those early days, there wasn't that much connection with people while they were in there, because I thought like it was all about being in the dark and you got to like just be in there and you're on your own, because that's how I did it. But people would come out and I started bringing them out, and then I'd share with Adrian, this person came out, they had an amazing experience. They were crying when they came out. Everything was beautiful. They're so happy. And we would share a little bit, and then she would come back and she would be like, that wasn't that isn't what I attuned to at all. That isn't what they came into after the session. Like they were super stimulated, super agitated. That was really hard for them. And what I started to see, Adrian could see it early on, was that when people came out, they felt so much relief. It was like they were rescued from 10 days alone in the desert. Of course, life's beautiful again. So they're crying and there's a lot of emotion and they're super grateful. And in that moment, they're seeing their experience through the lens of gratitude and relief. But once that washes over them and Adrian's able to really bring them a bit deeper into their body, there's like, holy shit, that was really hard. And I was like, holy shit, I'm missing a lot of not really able to see where people are at. And that was also because I wasn't able to really see where I was at, and a lot of my mechanisms of how I was insulated in a sense of purpose and power and all of those things. So it kind of hand in hand evolved over the years now of like, whoa, nurture is so important. And what we've seen more over the last year is like how the door, so there's a lock on the inside. Somebody can lock themselves in. So there's to really increase the sense of safety, but there might as well be a padlock on the outside of the door, because people unconsciously have so much shame in leaving and ending their time in the dark that they would never open the door to leave. And it was something we didn't really see until recently, that because there was a couple incidences where like there was something really stimulating and the person didn't leave the dark, and we realized that person didn't leave because there was so much shame that if they left they'd feel like they were a failure. And so it's almost like people feel trapped when they go in there, even though they can leave. And so what gets stirred up in the dark, compounded with the sense of being trapped in there, like really makes it difficult for people to settle. So it really propels people more into their coping mechanisms and patterns without knowing it, because they make people feel safe. So they go numb, whatever it may be. So now we really try to strip the shame off the front end. We really encourage people to come out, to turn on the light, to light a candle. There is no added benefit of completing your intended time of 3 days in the dark. Like you can endure, but that's not what we're doing here. We're not trying to like endure something hard. We're like assimilating, digesting, nurturing. We're including more of ourselves. But enduring is kind of like there's a lot of resistance underneath enduring. You're enduring because it's actually really hard, and you're not able to connect with what's really hard. And so now we have a handful of people who weave in and out of the dark. And there was one woman who came here and she was so stimulated, like panic attack level, 2 hours in the dark, just the first day that she got here of weaving in and out of the dark. And so we really worked with her of weaving in and out of the dark. And by the fourth day, she was like, I love being in the dark. I love being in my body. Like the waves of overwhelm are coming, but they're not overwhelming me anymore. Like I can be with them. And so there was a woman who came here a couple weeks ago, And I went up and she was like, I wake up in the morning and it really stimulates my system. I feel a little bit overwhelmed waking up in the dark. And so I turn the bathroom light on for like a couple minutes in the morning, and it helps me regulate. It helps me feel safe. And then I turn out the light, and that's the only light I have all day. And like, then what then happens for people is when there's these waves of overwhelm, they know that they're not trapped in there, and they trust. There's like an inner trust that emerges that they will do what is most nurturing. And so even for some people, just knowing that it's not failing, turning on the light or coming out for a little bit, like just knowing that helps their system relax and feel safe, that like they're not trapped. And so that's been a really interesting different element that we've kind of seen over the last year, and are still bringing that forward and weaving it in so people genuinely lean into what would nurture do. Would nurture
Yeah.
stay in here and endure for the next 12, 24, 48 hours, or would nurture turn on, light a candle for a bit and just like orient, feel safe, and then go back into the dark and really like bring that sense of safety into the dark, how to really feel safe in your body.
Yeah. That's really great that you're doing that. I mean, speaking from someone who has been in that space of, I tend toward panic and anxiety and just like a lot of fear within me. And there was a retreat that I went on where we were in a temazcal, the Mexican, pre-Hispanic sweat lodge, essentially. And I was in the far back. And I went into full blown panic. And I was like, I need to get out. I need to get out right now. And I was being forced to stay. And that made the panic grow. Like it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And finally, I had to scream to be let out. Like I didn't want to be driven to that place, but the panic just got out of hand, and I was like, I need to get out. So I leave, and my body was telling me, that's it. It's over. You did what you needed to do. Now we're going to stay out here. And I did feel like I was trying to be brought back into the experience. And so I think, just it sounds like you've gone through a lot of iterations and a lot of evolution and a lot of, like you said, removing ideas and ways of being. And that's something, it's an individual journey, but that forcing someone to have an experience that you want them to have is not always the way to do it. You need to be able to play with the universe and, like you said, learn from other people, understand like why is that happening, why is she doing that, and just allow, especially in this feminine yin energy, just allow it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely more of where we're at now, and what's um even seeing as when somebody takes a facilitator role, for many facilitators, there comes this like kind of very precarious level of responsibility, and this thing that gets coded in this really beautiful sense of purpose of like being of service and helping. But then the precariousness of that is that you're wanting someone to have a certain kind of experience. You're wanting to help somebody. You're wanting them to have the help, ultimately, so you fulfill your purpose and you feel good about yourselves. Granted, it's not, one doesn't see it that linearly, otherwise, it looks pretty shallow. But, ultimately there is. And so then there's less of a probably willingness or capacity to actually listen and let things resolve on their own without having to be the one who said the thing that helped them resolve it. I mean, and that's a constant journey for myself, and a constant learning of at times where I maybe messed up on that and like pushed too hard or pulled the rug out too fast, and it was really unsettling, as opposed to just being more spacious, listening, and letting like actually within myself and with the other person being okay in the unresolved. not needing to be the one who's resolving it or who has the answer. It's more just asking the questions and listening, and not really feeling that overwhelming responsibility of needing to help or needing to be of service. Like there was a gentleman who came here last year, and he has a oversees a very large foundation that gives money to really beautiful impact causes. And he was in the dark, and he was like, a lot of I'd really love to feel fear. I don't feel fear. My friends talk about fear. Maybe he's in
Wow.
his 60s at this point,
Good for
you
you,
know,
dude.
and he's just like, I don't feel fear. And I was just like, well, you're a very powerful man. Like, of course you don't feel fear. I would have said that myself a few years ago when I was in the dark. Like, fear wasn't something I really related to, but I was came to learn later that it was because how tightly held I was in certain ways that didn't even allow me to have access to fear. Um, I said, so, what would happen if we took your foundation away? Like, it's all gone. You don't have your foundation anymore. And he said, well, I still have my one-on-one spiritual coaching. Like, that's really what's most important to me. And I said, well, we take that away? You have nothing now. And then he was in the dark. It has more of an impact, because he's unconsciously or consciously at times thinking about all the beautiful things he does in the world. And what better of a it's probably one of the most grand purposes in life to be of service when one reaches that, but we perform it. Like, is it really from the inside out? We perform, not that there's anything wrong with it, but this sense of goodness and doing good things, part of it, there's a part that's sincere, right? But then there's a part that kind of performs because it makes us feel good about ourselves. And so I said, what if we take all that away? He said, oh, now I feel fear. And so we're like, all right, let's go with that. Where do you feel fear? What's that like? And as he started to get into that, he was like, wait, but like, how would I show love if you take all that away from me? And then it was like, well, this little boy, this scared little boy in you right now, would it not be a movement of love to just hold this scared little boy? And we just paused and landed in that. And that what that just revealed to me and then showed me the ways that I do that in myself, that this movement that was, to him, it was like, this is how I show love. This is about as good and as high and as worthy as it gets, is showing love in the world. And doing this was a way that was insulating him from, if he didn't have that, there was a lot of fear. And so obviously there is real true sincerity in that movement of doing good and helping others. And it's mixed with a part that is covering the fear because it has a purpose and some sense of power and goodness, as opposed to this other deeper sense of goodness that is just able to be with fear or sadness or lack. Pema Chodron, she has this beautiful quote. She says, we awaken to this tenderness for life when we can no longer shield ourselves from the vulnerability of our condition, from the basic fragility of existence.
Wow. I have so many questions.
Wow.
So many. First, I want to ask you, have your kids gone in the dark?
So I have an 8-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl. And when was it last year? I think as a family, we spent the night in the dark. Someone left early, and we went in, and we spent the night, and then woke up in the morning and just hung out for like an hour. And then I've gone in 2 or 3 other times with my son. We're just for like, we'll spend the night because he's so full of just wild boy energy. Going in with him during the day, he's just like bouncing off the walls. So I kind of have to like wake up there with him, where then I could kind of catch him in a bit more of a tender, quiet space. And so we've slept in there a few times and have enjoyed the darkness in the morning. He enjoys it. He loves, yeah, being in there.
Do you
And we've had a
find
couple.
there's,
Oh,
sorry,
go on.
do you find there's a difference between the way children react to the dark versus adults?
Yeah, so I mean, we've had a couple. We had one 12-year-old go in for 12 hours, and then I think Sid was, maybe we had a 13-year-old who went in for 4 days. Um, he had gone in the dark at home with his dad for a couple days, and then his dad was in one of the caves and he was in the other, and he was in there for 4 days.
Wow.
Um, I thought that was a little long when they wanted to go in for 4 days, but it was new, and so with these things, it's like I don't know what's appropriate until we get in and start exploring. And he enjoyed his whole 4 days. It didn't seem like it was too much for him. Um, it seems like the kids, and it's something that we intend to start doing more of having where youth come out. Maybe they spend a couple days in the surrounding wilderness. They kind of like team building and they really start to slow down together. And then they go in the dark for 12, 24, 36 hours. And then they come out for a couple more days and kind of come together. It seems like simplicity, and maybe youth, maybe the average screen kid is going to be different, if they've, where these kids weren't, and simplicity was not threatening or super stimulating to them. They still had that thing where their imagination's still there. They're still like, fantasy and imagination is still fulfilling. So like simplicity is a space to like explore. Whereas as we get more and more culturally conditioned, simplicity doesn't fill us. It actually exposes our lack. And so I think the kids still live in that. And so like my son goes in there. I mean, granted, it's a short bit of time, but he's just like, he's jazzed, and it's just like there's so much to do. Um, and so, which happens for some adults when they go in initially. Some people are stimulated immediately, and some people it takes them a day or two until the simplicity really like peels up the layers of like, whoa, like, who am I without a purpose and power? So yeah, I think kids, um, there's a lot less stimulation, whereas the simplicity is welcomed and is really actually nourishing.
Yeah. I figured as much because you said a lot of it was just releasing a lot of layers, and kids just don't have as many layers.
Totally right. Yeah, they're still not as culturally. They have less years of cultural conditioning, and so yeah, it is something we want to really explore with more of finding that sweet spot. Like for adults, we find that 3 days, 4 nights is like a solid amount. Um, there's a sense, probably because of our Western mind, that like longer is deeper and more, and you drink more medicine, you go further, and you go in more darkness makes you go further. And we find it's actually quite the opposite for most people, because it's so exposing. And if somebody has too much time in the dark, then when it gets exposing, the feeling of being trapped for 3, 4, 5, 6 days is just like, whoa. And then unconsciously, the whole nervous system reorganizes to feel safe. And then so somebody goes numb, whatever then happens, there's less nurture because it feels so overwhelming. And so there's that sweet spot. And so that we'd love to get into exploring more with youth, finding 12, 24, 36 hours, whatever it is. And yeah, having more youth come through, more youth rites of passage, getting to have that time where you are no longer looking to culture for a sense of worth, for a sense of meaning, and for gauging your importance. And I think that's what the darkness really brings, which is very unsettling, because then you lose your sense of self, because you have nothing to gauge your worth when you're not getting any kind of congratulations back or able to gauge your sense of achievement. And so it really strips and exposes how oriented we are to this very linear, kind of very masculine sense of importance through achievement, through power and purpose. And when that's gone, like just the human animal that is very vulnerable and exposed. Yeah. The
Yeah.
fragility of our conditioning and the fragility of existence, and really what's it like to really be in that and to be with that.
I wonder, have you experienced gifts come out? Because I'm just thinking about myself in the dark, and I haven't been in the dark many because I'm not. I'm the kind of person that turns all the lights on just to go get a glass of water
Uh-huh.
in the night. I really do try, but whatever experiences I've had have been scary. That's another
Wait,
question.
well, I'll pause you there. It's like, we have had people who are scared of the dark who come here and then find that this dark is different. Like there's like, when you go in your house and it's dark, like there is a chance that something could be there, but when you're in this cave, you're at least cognitively, that nothing else could be. You're in the room, the door's locked, there's absolutely no way. And so people then do tend to, I'd say there's not a direct correlation. Some people come and they're like, I am afraid of the dark, but then they're not that afraid in there. But it is different. Some people who have had traumatic experiences of of that happened in the dark, or who have had traumatic experiences where they weren't able to escape, those can come up in the dark, where there is this sense where somebody gets stimulated and they want to run, and feeling trapped in the dark really stimulates that trauma of when they were trapped.
Yeah.
And so, and again, that's where it's really unique. It's custom for each person. That person, we may get to know that before they even go in, and we're like, come out and then go back in, and really setting it up so they weave in and out of the dark. So there's not even like a sense of failure for coming out. Like there's no great achievement of completing your 3 or 4 days in the dark without coming out. Like, so what? I mean, you did something hard, but like, it's more the depth of tenderness, nurture, and newness that somebody comes into that can happen from weaving in and out, which is far more important than enduring 4 days of torture, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to be careful asking this question because I don't want to set expectations for anybody watching this and then they go to one of your retreats and they're like, I'm going to go in the dark so that I can reveal my gift. But
Mm-hmm.
have you ever experienced that something, I don't know, like all of a sudden somebody becomes more sensitive to things that they feel, or all of a sudden they begin to see things that they didn't see, or a sound comes out from within, like all of a sudden they start singing in a way that they never had, or anything like that ever happened?
Um, I'd say that I'll answer that, but before, it's like what many people, when people really drop in and settle in the dark, what most people say is, I can't believe how simple it is, because they were looking for something special, maybe like a really cool gift. And so, but what they find is what they came into, it is simple, but it's so fundamental. Like what you touch in the dark, when you really land in there, it's not because you achieved something, you got a gift, or because those tend to be validated through culture. And so it's only so deep. Like we're far deeper than culture. We precede culture, right? And so the changes that are available in the dark are fundamental. Like it precedes culture. And so it's really simple because it's so fundamental. It's not really complex. It's just a slight orientation shift, which is more challenging than it seems because it's our foundation. But then it changes everything. And so I'd say the greatest gift that most people get is to feel and to be embodied and to see how disembodied they are. There's been many men who have come here and they're like, my wife has talked to me about this feeling thing. I've never understood about feelings. And they're like, whoa, I know what it's like to feel now. Like I had no idea. I've heard about it, but I didn't know. And there's a lot of men who have said that. I mean, and women too. It touches me really when I hear the men say it because I relate. Um, and it's just heart melting to like when you see somebody come and they're guarded with all the different things, they may not see it that way, and then they totally come undone in there, and there's just this sense of humility and simplicity, and they're just crying from the tenderness. And so, in terms of like spiritual gifts, I'd say no. Like, there hasn't been someone who's come out and all of a sudden is like able to see across the cosmos, or they're able to, like they're like able to like weave into some fairy realm. And like, I just, that hasn't, some people have really amazing dreams. I'd say like maybe those cool things come through in dreams. Very few people have big visions and visuals. And the people who do, when they really drop in, the visions and visuals are just like, they kind of tend to find them more annoying because they pull you out more into the stuff that comes and goes. Whereas these depths of tenderness are kind of like, they're so subtle. And so
Yeah.
they're more hidden. And so, I mean, there's some people who have like, well, I haven't sung before, or I haven't sung in years and my voice was gone. And that really came back. But I'd say those tend to be very secondary to this like newly discovered depth of tenderness, intimacy, and simplicity that people uncover.
And what's the biggest transformation that you've witnessed after the retreat? Like that someone has applied into their life and it's just like completely changed them.
We don't stay in touch as much as I'd love to. I mean, we've had close to 500 people come through here. So,
That's
you know,
insane.
we hear a lot of stories of some people when they go home and they're like, this of just like what's changed them. And so I don't have that many stories. I mean, we do these Zoom calls every 6 weeks that Adrian leads. All the past dark retreatants are invited. I'd say usually 80%, we do them every 6 weeks. And so about 80% of the people on the call are people who have come in the last 6 weeks and are feeling really, um, that they're wanting the extra support, because most people go home and they're disappointed because it's like a similar thing that they came into in the dark. Is in the dark they came and they were looking for this grand thing and they touched something new and they landed in it, and then they go home and there's this sense that like they're failing because they've kind of lost it. And so there's this new reorienting of like, but what you really got in the dark, or how you came into that new thing, was you just opening and being with what was here. And then you discovered this new thing, but it was that orientation that had you dropping into it. And so then going home, there's this reorienting to including more of ourselves and not trying to mirror, mimic, and perform these spiritual states that we got. And I think that's happening. People have awakenings or windows into things, and then there's a performing of it because it felt so significant and meaningful. But I think if we're really honest, they come and go just like anything else. And it's that quality of being with. And
Yeah.
and so, people who are new of like where they're able to be in their body more. They're not as stimulated as much. They're things like that. They just don't get as many big stories. And I think that that lends itself to the change is so fundamental that like it's one can almost miss it, like not even because it's such a deep change, that because it doesn't come out in big experiences, like how we're used to orienting our self-worth and gauging our level of how transformative it is, because now we're like, this and this is happening and we're seeing this and we're manifesting that. It's just like a deeper sense of settledness, of intimacy, of tenderness, of connectivity. And that's it's difficult to sell. It doesn't sound that sexy. It's not that exciting. I'd rather be flying with the fairies if somebody was telling me that I'd be able to do that. So like it's um it's a real orientation shift, which is difficult for a lot of us because it doesn't fill our sense of self-importance like we're used to needing to do.
Well, personally, I think that everything you're showing on social media looks very interesting and exciting. So
Yeah.
it may not be as sexy as Fairyland, but
Yeah.
it definitely brings its own
Yeah.
it brings its own mojo.
Totally. And
Yeah.
and that carries its own little bit of precariousness, and we talk about it on our website, whereas like we are showing the peak experience of the dark retreat. When somebody takes their mask off, it is a peak experience. They're definitely blown open, and there's a lot of tenderness and emotions that move, and for most people that is the peak experience moment. It is the thing that's obviously easiest to capture and to share. Um, and so some people come and they've seen all the videos and they're just like they're like, they imagine or they romanticize that person that they saw was in that the entire time they're in the dark, and they're like, what's wrong with me? And as I said, in the early days, it's hard to tell from the outside if somebody's experiencing that because of relief or because of openness and connectivity, because they can kind of look the same. Somebody rescued from the desert for 10 days is going to be super emotional and happy and grateful. And somebody who is just like dropped into new depths of tenderness and openness is going to be really emotional and like, so it looks the same. And we romanticize, whatever we do to make ourselves feel better and imagine what it will be like for us. And so I think it's important that like to really land in that it is challenging, it is really exposing. What we see when people are revealed with their masks, they were not in that the whole time, right? They may have had pieces and waves in that, but like what had them coming into that was this new way of orienting, of being available for all of themselves without trying to fix, change, transform, heal, or resolve, which is kind of most of our movements. And then what happens when genuinely in our body, it's okay to feel this way. And we go more for a sense of okayness, like what happens in someone's body when it's genuinely okay to feel this way, and we're genuinely receptive to what we're feeling. And then the layers on their own move through us and they peel off. And there's not this sense of importance of doing the work. We're just relaxing and it's just happening. And I think that's been one of the most poignant things that I've really landed in here, is like how natural those spaces are to us. Like it's not necessarily because of someone's effort and work that they put into it. I mean, that's there, and the level of sincerity, but it's like it's natural. It's Meister Eckhart, who was a 15th or 16th century Christian mystic. He used to say the soul grows not by addition, but by subtraction. And so that uncovering, when we really move underneath our cultural conditioning, it really changes the game then of how we orient towards self-importance, to self-worth, and to meaning. It like we're not looking for the same feedback, for the same things to confirm our worth. It then It becomes a whole different thing. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny how we start off life kind of filling, and then we get to a point where we're like empty, 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 right? So, Scott, do you have one piece of advice for retreat hosts or facilitators based on your experience? One piece of wisdom that you'd like to share?
Uh-huh. Geez. I mean, I think, I touched on it a little bit earlier, and it's been something that I roll around a lot, and that Adrian's usually reflecting to me as well, is that movement in us in the facilitator role of just getting really honest with the pieces of us that are filled with a sense of power and purpose from that. And not that there's anything wrong with it. Part of it's just a natural thing. We're human and we engage in our culture, and it feels meaningful, and there is a sense of power and purpose. And also just getting as honest as we can with maybe how we use that to unconsciously cover parts of us that feel lack, and that then maybe we're not as available to feeling those other things because we have such a great sense of purpose. And so where in us that we feel that precarious level of responsibility to heal someone else, to help someone else, to resolve something for someone else, and how that maybe inhibits us from listening and just resting with someone else, letting them be unresolved, which then gives someone else the permission to be unresolved. And when somebody genuinely has the permission to be unresolved, then like the resolution can spontaneously emerge. And it's not like our responsibility to heal someone else. It's like, and just noticing the mix in us, the sincerity that comes from the inside out, and then that precarious level of responsibility and power and purpose to be the one that's healing someone. Or somebody could get really fancy with the words and it's moving through them to heal someone. But like, those can all carry, yeah, a self-importance, which again is natural, and not that anything's wrong with that, but to just notice that, and to notice what that maybe covers. Like if we took all of that away, what remains? And just also getting familiar and intimate with that.
Thank you. That
Yeah.
was good. So now I would like you to ask a question to what I've been calling the retreat gods. If there was one question you would like to ask, what would it be?
So you have to tell me what the retreat gods are.
So the retreat gods are basically just, the all-knowing entity of a retreat. Like, is there any question about it? Marketing, venues, attendees. I don't know. I'm just throwing things out. But it's essentially anything about the retreat process or experience that you have a question about that you would ask to these all
Something that's
knowing
all knowing.
entities. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Um, you know what? Nothing comes immediately. And I think why is like because of how unique we've seen now the process to be. Like that there could be one thing that applies to everyone. What feels supportive to one person doesn't to the other. And so, um, yeah, nothing really emerges in the moment. Um, I guess because, like, I don't know, maybe there's a question that I mean, I haven't thought of, but some question that would answer something that would like universally benefit everyone. I mean, maybe like that there is a lot that we're constantly learning. And so, um, yeah, any other orientations or modalities or ways of being that would be beneficial for many people to really connect with while they're in the dark. Like, I'm sure there's a lot that we've learned, like even just starting to strip the shame off the front end so people don't feel trapped in there. Just so learning more um, invitations and ways of orienting that would have more people feeling safe, connected, and nurtured in the dark. So yeah, that would maybe be my question: to have more of those revealed, because we're constantly learning, and there's more to know.